What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, you are watching TWA Motorsports, and yes, today we are going to drop this car. Now, if you remember the last video on this thing, we put the wheels on it. I think that's pretty blatantly obvious, and I told you I didn't like the look of it. It drives me nuts, especially the front. The back's not as bad. That front gap, guys, it looks almost four-wheel drive. And we can't have that, not on this channel. So, what are we gonna put on it? Well, I've got all the UMI stuff that we yanked off of this car. The front that had never been installed, the back that was installed that we removed in a video a while back. And so that is what we're gonna transfer. It's all the same. So whether you have a convertible or a hardtop or a T-top car, suspension setup is all the same. We got new Bilsteins to go in the front with the UMI drop springs. I will be listing all this stuff in the description, guys. I know I got it used, but if you're wanting to know, let's say when I get it done, you like the drop or whatever, and you want to know how to get these parts, that's why I list them down there. So, not sponsored by UMI in any way, shape, or form. And when we get to the back, there's some other stuff that I'm hoping to install, which we'll get to when we get back there. But, and it's the only part, honestly, that I bought out of this. I mean, I bought the car and the springs came with it, but this other piece I bought because it's kind of a necessity when you lower it. But like I said, we're going to start with the front. We're gonna work our way to the back. So let's get this thing off the ground. Make sure that you're not hitting the fender when you're lifting this thing up. Jack from the actual piece of the frame. I'll try to show you once I get it up in the air, but then we need to get the wheels off and I'll show you what's next. Obviously, once you get it off the ground, when you get the wheels and tires off, but check out, you can see there's a piece of the frame rail. This is where people like to put their jack. That's plastic. Right behind that, there's a piece of a fender. Or I'm sorry, a frame rail. That's where you need to jack this thing up. I'm probably gonna slide some jack stands under there. I'm not sure I'm gonna get this all done in one night. Hopefully I will, but anyway, let's get the wheels and tires off. This thing actually has a strut brace, which makes life a little harder because I can't get a impact. I mean, I probably could. I say I can't get an impact. I could definitely get an impact on the outside. But I can't get one on the inside. So we're gonna have to take these 15 millimeters off by hand. We're gonna do that on both sides, get this thing out of the way. I think I'll just set this stuff over to the side for now. Once we got both those 15s off, you can see we got that out of the way. Presents a little bit of an issue on this side, which we'll get to here in a little bit. What we're gonna do at this point is we're gonna go to the other side and we're gonna grab a set of side cutters and I'll show you exactly what that's about. Now, why I grabbed a set of side cutters is we're gonna push this up, and to me, this is about the easiest way to grab these out of here. So we're gonna take this cotter pin out, and I should have some replacements. It's always a good idea to replace those. And I don't remember if this is yeah, I think it's a 15 millimeter. Let's loosen this up. I'm going to loosen it all the way down to the bottom here. I'm not going to take it completely off, just down to where it's at the bottom, because we're going to have to knock this joint apart. There's just no other way to get the strut and everything out of the way without doing that. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to grab a 13, and I'm going to get a 13 on my impact on the bottom, and we're going to get the sway bar out of place. And I'm going to do this on both sides. Probably wouldn't hurt to spray a little WD-40 on these, especially if they have any age on them. Once we get both sides, you can see then the sway bar moves. And actually, those guys are in really good shape. This is a pretty decently low mile car. That strut assembly actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. So either way, now I'm going to take a 15 millimeter here, and we're going to get the strut loose, at least from the A-arm. Now, it should, when I do that, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do first. We're going to take a hammer and we're going to hit this and see if we can knock this loose. And we already got it loose. And so now what'll happen is if we relieve the pressure on that first, sometimes it doesn't want to push against it. So now we can take the 15s out. Now that we got, and actually that's a 13 coming in from the bottom and a 15 on the nut on top. But now we can take this loose. And look, guys, you can probably put a jack stand under here if you want, or you can push this down. Either way, we're gonna have to get that loose. If it puts a lot of tension on your brake line, try to keep that in check, because we don't want, you know, to jack up our brake line. I think we should be fine though. Now you can see I've got that 15 off and this popped up, and it puts a little bit of pressure on the brake line, but if you fold it back a little bit, I think you're gonna be fine. That's not, I mean, I've still got some slack in it, so I'm gonna say that's fine. Now, we need to get the strut out. We already got the 15s, but now we need to get the 13s that are back behind it. So you may need an extension on this one and probably a short instead of a deep socket. Probably use a short on that one so you can get an extension in there, but let's get those off. Once you get both those loose, our strut can then push in between there and we can pull it out. Here's where sometimes an older car gets fun. For one, we kind of want to pay attention to the way this shock is set up. So you can see the way these are pointed in correlation with the top right there. We want to try to keep that because moving this after the fact is hard. We are going to be replacing struts, but this guy should come off the top. Pretty normal for them to be crusty and gross. Not a big deal. Here, however, we're going to have to get a strut compressor of some sort, which I have over there, to compress this down. The other thing, guys, is we're going to need to spray a bunch of WD-40 on this and let it kind of soak. The good news is because we're using a new strut, we don't have to worry about going back together with this. So if we end up having to cut it, which I've had to do in the past, we've got a new strut to go in it. But if you're reusing your stock shocks, which a lot of people do, you're gonna have to get this guy off without cutting it. These are the strut compressors that I use. You can see I've got one on each side. They're actually a little big for this, but we've got it on there. 15 millimeters is what your stock nut is. Guys, generally what I like to do is I like to put a little, I don't like to compress this spring all the way because I like to have a little pressure to help push past some of the rust, okay? Do this without anybody around. It's a good idea to put your foot on either the spring or the strut. Technically the spring, and let the strut shoot out if it's going to. Just make sure it's not gonna damage anything behind it. That's just the preference that I take. I'm gonna go and do this outside, away from everything and everybody, with my foot on the spring. Zap that with a 15 millimeter. It may take a little while. I barely put anything on it and it came right off, so I got lucky there. But here's what we're gonna have. This obviously was sitting on the top side of the spring. This was on top of that. It goes in like this. Obviously your nut was on top. And then we have our strut and our spring. Now our spring does have a kind of a water jacket, which I like to reuse if it'll fit. But what I'm gonna do at this point is I'm gonna get our strut compressor off of this spring and go grab our new stuff. We've got the new strut assembly. I got those off. I got that out. And that's, sometimes your new struts will come with that, but like I said, we're gonna reuse that on this just to keep some of the water out of it. You don't have to, because it does come with a kind of a smaller version of that here. But look, we can't put this on yet because we have to have something to hold the bottom of the strut, or the spring, I mean, which means we're gonna have to knock this guy off of that. So I'm gonna go get a rubber mallet, turn this upside down, and we gotta get this guy off here because we need it on this. You can see that I just used this rubber mallet, turned that thing upside down, knocked it off, and it's a snug fit, but it will slide on your new strut. If you're not doing struts, all we gotta do is put the spring on and go back together, but because we're doing struts, it's a little bit harder. Anyway, now we can go ahead and put this on. The reason this isn't on right now is because that has to go on first. It won't clear that. So now we can tap this on the top of the strut. That one had the same thing. You can see it right there. Like I said, that just kind of keeps dirt and debris out of it, but I'm gonna tap that on and then we need to go grab our spring. Check out the new one beside the old one. You know, a lot of times when you're putting these back together, you don't even have to compress the new spring because it's so much shorter. Once the weight of the car gets on it, it'll push it together. But we need to put this on and we need to line up the bottom of it in this little channel here. It accepts that. And then, like I said, I'm gonna put this guy on. And if it'll fit, yeah, it should fit in between this, just like I said, to keep the dirt and debris out. Another thing I didn't even talk about is your bump stops in there. A lot of times it falls out, but there is a washer. You can see the washer on the very top, and what that does, let me see if I can pull it back apart real quick. Actually, I can't. It's right underneath this guy, and it keeps things from sliding too far down. But then once you get this on, you know, I originally said you need to orient it a certain way, but I honestly think, guys, we'll be able to do that with it in the car. We're not going to have to compress this. This is as far down as it goes. So we're still going to be able to spin the bottom of this thing, which is good. But let's get the new lock nut on the top and get it snugged down. You can see I've got it ran all the way down, and we could still move the spring. So we don't need to worry about orienting that the way it was before. But now we just got to reverse this. We got to put this back up in the car over there. Start these two, even though we're going to take them back out, we're going to start the two nuts. That'll keep things in place, and then we'll take those back off, obviously, to put our strut brace back in place. There's another trick that I kind of want to show you, because we're just going to duplicate this on the other side, but obviously the brake master's in the way. So I'm going to show you that process, and then I won't show you all what I did here, because it'll be the exact same on the other side. I got it pushed in there, and what I do is I line these two up first, because there's a nut here that we can start, like I said, where the strut brace went, and then I've got the two 13s back behind. Now we're going to do a trick, which like I said, I'll talk about here in a little bit, but for now, all we need to do, let's slide our, may have to use a jack under this, by the way, to jack this back up, but let's get our 13/15s in the bottom of the strut, get those lined up, and then we'll worry about getting this back into place, because we can pull this down a little, give us a little more freedom. And then, like I said, if you need to, you could always jack this thing up. On the other side here, there's a couple things GM did. Obviously, they put the master right in the way. So what we have to do is we have to take the 215, I think they're 15 millimeters. Yeah, they are, loose, to pull the master out and away. And the reason we have to do that is because we can't get to this Torx right here without doing that. What I'm planning on doing here is I've already knocked it loose down below, but I need to get the Torx here, move this out of the way and get the Torx here. But what I do, for a couple of reasons, one, to make it more symmetrical, since those are 13s on that side and Torx on this side, I swap one of the 13s over to this spot, because you can then reach that with a wrench, whereas you wouldn't be able to normally do that. So if you ever have to take it apart again, you don't have to take the master loose. You can see what I'm talking about. If you pull this up and out of the way off those studs, your brake master's out of the way, and you can get that T50. This one's not a problem, it's that one. So like I said, what I'm going to do is we're going to leave that one at the bottom. We're going to have one at the bottom on the other side, and then when we go back together, we're going to put one of those 13s back here. Anyway, so now we're almost finished. That was the only trick that I was going to show you up top. Like I said, I'm going to knock the rest of this down off camera. Same exact situation as the other side, and then hopefully we'll get back into some torque specs going back together here. Now we're ready to torque down the front suspension. I went ahead and ran both sides of the sway bar end links down. Just got those snug. Generally, I like to tighten them until you can't spin the center, okay? I also generally like to tighten them with the wheels sitting on the ground, so I'll do that off camera. But what we need to do is torque the upper. 38 foot-pounds is what this one goes to, and then 48 foot-pounds are what the shock bolts go to. And then once we get it set on the ground, we'll go up top, put the master back in place, and then torque the top. We'll talk about that in a second. But I did want to show you, for Father's Day, Cohen got me a new digital 3/8 drive torque wrench. So I'm going to use it for the first time. It's kind of exciting. Really good gift. Goes to inch pounds and foot pounds. I'll try to list it in the description if you guys don't have one. It's my first time using it. I think it seems to be highly recommended. It's a Quinn is the name. I don't know, never used it before, but like I said, cool gift. We're gonna give it a shot. Now I will tell you, you will have to swing this past, obviously we can get a cotter key in, so if it gets to 38, don't loosen it up to get the cotter pin in, go just a hair more to get that castle nut to line up with the opening. Now that we got it on the ground, it is quite a bit lower, that's for sure, but we're still gonna have to drive it to get it to settle out a little bit. This is the way I like to tighten these once it's on the ground. I'm gonna clean this up a little bit, but 37 are what the bolts go to, and 32 are what the nuts go to in the front, and that's on both sides. And guys, I just snug that down when I put the master back in place. So I'm gonna torque the back ones first, get that back in place, probably around 20 foot-pounds. I mean, it's going into plastic, so don't get real crazy there. But either way, I'm gonna get these torqued down, get that area kind of cleaned up underneath that paint or that crossover bar or strut tower brace. It's gonna be a little difficult to get 32 on these inners. We'll just have to kind of guess on those. We are definitely a lot lower. Got everything torqued down. I torqued down the front wheels to 100 foot-pounds, reached under there, and tightened up the sway bar end links. I'd really like to replace those at some point with some polyurethane. But look, there is no doubt that closed up our wheel gap in the front. Now, this thing has stereo in the back. So do we leave it in the back? I don't think so. We're gonna have to put those springs in. I just don't think there's any way around it. If you guys noticed at the beginning of this video, it looked like it set a little lower in the back. So I'm hoping, I think that UMI sets their springs up where it's like 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches in the front, 1 inch in the back, but I think there's a 1/4 inch offset. So I'm hoping that's the case, because I don't want it to be like Cali leaned like the truck is right now. So we may have to experiment back here, but let's get started on the back. Now that we got the front down, what we'll probably do, I don't know, I'm gonna maybe possibly move it around. I may do it right here, I don't know. But we need to get the back off the ground, and we'll probably take the wheels off, even though we don't necessarily have to. Now I've turned this thing so I've got a little more room, because the back, look, the back on a hatchback, as you guys saw recently on this guy, is not terrible. But on this, it's a little bit different, because you've got this whole inner structure is different. But I want to kind of show you what the deal was. So this guy was right here. You just turn these two little deals, similar to what would go on right here in a hatchback car. And then we can get this out of the way. Okay, I think that's just like a bulkhead or a you know, something to disconnect the passengers, or the passengers from the trunk. What we're gonna need to do now is, I'm hoping we don't have to remove a bunch of plastic, but I'm gonna get inside and see what's next. But we need the access, and the whole reason of this is the access to the top of the shock. I don't think we would be doing ourselves any favors to put the top down. At least I don't think as of right now. But let me look inside there and see, you know, what's the easiest access point. I know a lot of people will cut the carpet, but I'm not planning on doing that. So I got the seat folded down, and you can see the perforations here that a lot of people will cut. I hate doing that. I just don't want to do it. So what I'm going to do is, this panel is actually not installed correctly. I'm assuming whenever the speakers were done, maybe we didn't get it put back together correctly. But I'm going to take this Phillips out. I'm going to take the torque, I believe it's a T40 here, or 45. We'll get this out of place, and maybe we can just get this panel out of the way and be able to reach back in and move the carpet over. We're gonna see. All that was holding that panel in is just that T45 and that Phillips up top, the cap on the top. It's supposed to tuck under this, and it wasn't. So on the other side it is. We'll have to get it out from under there, but I would assume I would have thought there would have been more holding it together than that. But you can kind of see where he ran power wire, and I thought maybe he dyno matted over that, but he didn't. So that's good. But here's what I'm running into. I'm thinking I'm gonna have to remove these towers here, and I'm not exactly sure how they go together. Feels like there's clips on this. There are. Oh yeah, it's just a clip-in deal. But I may have to put the top back up to get the carpet, because I didn't get enough slack here to get back in there. Now, what I possibly could do, I don't know how these go on. I don't want to potentially rip the top. If I can figure out how these go on, that might give me enough to slide it over without actually taking the belt out. I put the top back up because I thought maybe we could access those seat belt holders. There's a little, see that plastic plug right there? That right there is all that keeps that little plastic cover over the seat belt holders. But I still don't necessarily think that I'm gonna have enough room. What I'm gonna try to do next is I'm gonna try to take a 15, looks like a 15 millimeter that bolts that seat belt to the car itself, and see if that gives me enough room. If it doesn't, then we're gonna have to pull some more apart. Those are 13s, by the way, and that did not help me. So what I'm doing now is, you can see I pulled the plastic panel here, just a couple clips, and these things come out of the way. They're just a little harder to get to. I think this side only has one clip, whereas the passenger side had two. I think it's supposed to have two. I think there's supposed to be one here, but I'm assuming when it was taken apart for the speakers that it just didn't get back in. And everything was going good until I just saw this. Now look, I'm gonna fix it, and the rest of it doesn't look terrible, but see that wire nut right there? That's not gonna fly. But I was able to, once getting those two pieces out, fold the carpet over, and so I think I'll be able to fold it over the belts up front, or at least that's my hope. and then we'll have it out of the way for the shocks. Isn't that crazy? You got to take all this apart on it. I mean, look, could you cut it? Could you fold the seat down and cut it? Absolutely you could. Is that the way Travis is going to do it? No, that is not the way I'm going to do it. So anyway, I'm going to pull this carpet up, hopefully over the belts without breaking anything. And at that point, we will hopefully have access to the shocks. We will be able to push our belts over, I think. Now, to give you a little bit better showing of what we got, you can see the seatbelt holder has like a million bolts. There's actually 6, 2, 4, 6 bolts to hold this thing, this whole bracket on. Now, I want to take that off. 6 bolts, that's 12 bolts per side. So what I'm going to do is I've got this little foam piece out. You can see we have really good access now. I was able to pull the seat belts. There was enough opening here to pull them over. I'm assuming that's been done before. That's how this dyno mat all happened. I don't know if it doesn't look like he took this stuff out. I'm guessing maybe he didn't, but either way, we need to get the proper ratchet. I think I've got a ratchet that'll work in an area like this. Let's see if we can get this loose before we even get this thing off the ground. I got it out with a 15mm wrench. I actually have a socket that would probably work in there that has, it goes all the way through, but I just grabbed a 15 and it was relatively loose. Now, if the top starts to spin, you can clamp something on it, but generally when you've got pressure up against it, that's why I wanted to do this first. You can get that off without it spinning. Sometimes you're not that lucky, but look, if it starts to spin, it's got a spot on the top you can clamp something to get it started, and you should be able to get it off there. I mean, it's tight quarters, that's for sure. But now that we've got that out, we can actually get this thing off the ground and start the process of lowering it. We've got it off the ground. You can see that I lift from the center differential, and then I've got 2 jack stands under where the, I guess you could call it a frame right there. It's not on the jack stand yet, but I will tell you guys, I just discovered this thing has air shocks. You can see this guy right here. I don't know if that's because of the stereo in the back. I'm hoping that we don't have, like I said, a Cali lean when we get done, but I'm going to be pulling this all out. So it's going to take me a minute, but the very first thing I'm going to do is we're going to get the shock out of place. And so I believe that's a 21mm. We'll get that off. Once that's out of the way, that shock is ready to come out. Remember, because we did the top first. And once that happens, we can kind of let it down on the jacks and get the springs out next. Sorry, it was actually a 22mm to get the bottom of the shock off, but we've got it off now. And got the shocks out of the way on both sides. Now what we need to do is we need to slowly let this down, get the pressure off the rear end and onto the jack stands. You can see my rear end is leaking, by the way, which, like I said, we're possibly taking care of that. But anyway, let's slowly let it down, and that will relieve all the pressure on the spring, and we can get the spring out of the way. We got both springs and isolators out. Sometimes you got to use a pry bar to get this over the lip, even with it all the way down. I mean, I've got it all the way down, and it's still wanted to stick in there, but that's fine. Just use a little pry bar. These are the new UMI springs, or new to me UMI springs. They were previously installed on the Trans Am, as you saw, but you can see they are shorter. Now I'm kind of back and forth on whether I'm going to use the stock isolators. I think I probably will, to be honest with you. And the main reason, guys, is because this thing has stereo equipment in the back. That'll give me, you know, a little additional lift. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll put heater hose on the top coil, and that'll get you another quarter to half inch of drop. But I don't want to do that on this car, like I said, because of stereo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer those over to here. But before we do that, I'm also going to go grab the shocks, and I'm going to go ahead, I think, and get those in place next, at least the top. So we're going to go ahead and push the tops through. Cam's out here. I'm going to have him help me get the threading started, or hold him from the bottom, one of the two. I actually changed my mind, and here's why. If we put the spring in, which I've already got in, and you'll notice that I've got the opening at the bottom in the same place on both sides. You can't really see that side, but and I do that for a reason, okay? If you put the opening facing the same way, so I've got them both, obviously the springs are shaped the same, but I've got both the openings at the very bottom of the spring, where the spring ends basically, pointing towards the center of the axle on the driver's side. Now, what we need to do is slowly have, it helps if you have two people, but if you slowly raise the rear end, we can make sure that it centers up top. And the reason I'm doing this first is because if I get this compressed, I can push the shock through the top and into the bottom opening, and it'll stay in place while I at least get the top started. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. But anyway, we're gonna lift this up. I'm gonna be going back and forth, making sure it's centered in the top. You don't want it to be off. Otherwise it's gonna set crooked or it's gonna make noise. So just make sure that you're centering up top once you've got it in place on the bottom. Once you make sure that those are centered, which we did, we've jacked it all the way up until it's just coming off the jack stands. I mean, just starting to relieve the pressure on those, and we are good. So now let's go grab the new shocks and take the top off, push the top up through first, make sure you keep your rubber isolator on one side, and then push it up enough to get it in the bottom. Now, these are the, I did want to show you these real quick. These came with that kit. Well, they came off the Trans Am, but it's a kit that comes with the UMI springs and the Bilstein shocks. So they're kind of spec'd for this. And guys, I'm telling you right now, you can see it definitely dropped it. I am hoping it's not too much, like I said, based off the stereo, but what I think I am gonna do is we'll probably remove that spare tire back there. That'll help pull some of that weight off the back and the jack, because we don't need that back there. It's looking good. Now normally, at this point, we'd be finished. We got the rubber washer on top, then the metal washer, then we have the nut that comes with this. I've got the bottom of it, obviously in the bottom, with the 22 millimeter. But I can go ahead and tighten these down a little bit, but we're not finished. And that's the other piece of the puzzle that I was wanting to show you guys. Now look, just looking to drop one, at this point, we would torque everything up and you would be finished. But the problem with lowering an F-body is it changes the geometry. And so a lot of times you get wheel hop, especially in a 6-speed, when you're trying to like take off from, let's say, a spirited takeoff from a stop. It's gonna wheel hop. Now, some people have addressed that by changing out the lower control arms, which helps. But the next piece that I'm gonna show you does require us cutting something, but we'll eliminate that and actually make this thing kind of launch more than what it would normally do, and it'll also eliminate your wheel hop. Now, as far as tightening the top, I went ahead and did that. And there's not really a torque spec on this. I just go until the washer, the rubber washer underneath the metal washer starts to bulge out. And so now that I've got that complete, I'm gonna go ahead and put this back together, or somewhat back together. And the reason why is it's making me nuts, and I don't want the carpet, it's warm out here, I don't want it to like start to, you know, kind of lose its shape. So we need to put those little foam pieces back in there. I think that's just mainly for sound deadening, to be honest with you. I don't think you're gonna hurt anything if you forgot and left them out, but we've got them, so let's put them back in. And then we'll get underneath and see if we can address the part I was just talking about. Got the majority of the car back together on the inside anyway. I took a little bit of time off camera and took that wire nut out, soldered those connections. That's just what I trust, guys. But anyway, these are the next piece that I'm putting in this puzzle. These are from UMI. There's several companies that make these. What these do is they relocate the lower control arm. So like I said, when you lower these things, the geometry changes and they want to wheel hop and do some weird stuff. So putting these in place, this is the bolt-in version. You can see this eyelet here. That's kind of how you know. If they weren't bolt-in, they were weld in, they would not have this piece here. This holds them in place with the shock. That's why I didn't go ahead and lock the bottom of the shock down. This goes in the stock location where the A-arm was, and then you have two different mounting points you can use. I generally use the very bottom one. So in order to put these on, we're gonna have to cut a brake bracket because they will not slide over. I'm gonna show you exactly which one we're gonna cut here. Now, once you're under the car, you can see what I'm talking about as far as the brake bracket that we're gonna have to cut. So the problem is that this e-brake holder will not, it's too wide. So you can't sandwich this around it, and you can't go under it because it's a U shape. So what we're gonna have to do is, generally what I do is either cut in this corner or cut in this corner. So what I think, I'm gonna try to unpin this and maybe clip it out of the way, and I'm gonna try to cut it right here on the car, just with a small cutoff disc, and we're gonna cut this section right here. I'd like to keep the locator. You see this locator right here? If you cut over here, you know, nothing's holding it except the bolt. If you cut it right here, then you have multiple holding points. You have the keeper, and it kind of sandwiches between. So either way, let's get my grinder or cutoff wheel on my grinding, or my battery powered grinder, I can't even talk, and cut this real quick. We're gonna do that on both sides. Well, normally I can do it on the car, but the problem is that my grinder disc is too big and I'm just risking running into wiring or the e-brake line. So what I'm gonna do is take an 18 millimeter. We're gonna get this bolt out, and look, your lower control arm probably is gonna stay in place. I don't think it'll fall unless we loosen the front, which we'll probably have to install this. But either way, let's get the 18 loose and get that bolt out. Just having that bolt out allowed me to move this down and give me way more room to cut now. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish my cut. You can see I've got this little lip cut off. This guy right here. Didn't take long, not much there. But now that we got that out of the way, we can go grab our piece. And look, we're gonna have to use, it comes with a sleeve that goes up top here. And the reason it comes with that is because if you started to torque this down, it would smash this together. So make sure that you get the sleeve in. And then I'd like to use the bolts in the same pattern they were before. And when I say that, the bolt was coming through from the backside. And so I like to do that same option. You know, I don't know, I'll just pick you like that. We've got everything in place. So the sleeve in the upper here, there's a washer on the outside. And like I said, I like to keep the bolts coming in the same way the factory did. We'll tell you guys some of the struggles that you're gonna have here. I didn't have any trouble getting it on the shock, so you can see it sandwiches in between there. The only problem you may run into is sometimes your lower control arm is really stiff and you need to loosen it up front, which I'm gonna do anyway, and I'm gonna re-torque it with the suspension loaded. But sometimes the rear end will shift back, so the whole rear end will come back towards you, and you need to put a ratchet strap somewhere on a brace in the front of the car and the rear end, and kind of pull the rear end forward in order to line up this lower control arm. But you can see I'm in the bottom hole, and I'm gonna go ahead and knock the other side out. I've just got the bolts loosely threaded in there because I do not want to torque these down. Now you can torque the bottom of the strut down, or the shock, but you cannot torque these down until the suspension's loaded. And like I said, we need to loosen the fronts up and tighten those at the same time. We want to tighten it when it's in the middle, and so it doesn't destroy our bushings. Now that I've got both sides installed, we're gonna torque that bottom of the shock, okay? The one that it's sandwiched in between, to 66 foot-pounds. And then we're gonna have to get the suspension loaded and torque down the rest of the bolts, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Last thing I did here was torque down all of these, so upper and lower and the front, after I bounced up and down on it to 80 foot-pounds. So we are solid now. I'm gonna let it back down on the ground, get the wheel stands out from under it. We should be finished. We've got this thing back on the ground and it looks incredible. So much better. Closed up that gap in the wheel wells. Oh, I just love it, guys. And look, you can't go wrong with a red car and chrome wheels. It just looks so nice. Absolutely love the look of it. It just didn't have the right look at that height. And like I said, I get why the other owners, you know, they didn't lower it. Either they, their driveway, just, it wouldn't let that happen. I didn't get a chance to take it out and drive it yet. Those struts are spec'd for these springs. So it's a kit. And like I said, guys, I'll list it in the description down below if you want to check it out. Like, it came with the Trans Am, as you know, but I think it's a good looking, it's like a perfect amount of drop, I think. It's not too low. But just gives it that good looking stance. And then with those 17x11s in the back, I thought it looked really awkward when it was at the stock height. The other thing I did while I was down there is I made sure that the wheel wasn't going to interfere with the inner fender. Now these are a Nitto 555R, which normally I wouldn't have a drag radial on this car, but that's what was on the Trans Am, so we obviously swapped it over. But they're a little more slender, so they're a thinner 315 than any of the other ones on the market. So you can kind of get away with not either rolling fenders or sometimes hammering the inside of the fender well to not have any issues rubbing. So sometimes if you use a different 315, you're going to have to clearance on the inner side of the front of this back fender. So on the inner, it sometimes will hit. So we'll see. I wanted to drive it, but it looks like it's getting ready to rain. So I obviously don't want to take it out and have to clean it all up again. But hopefully you guys did enjoy the video of the drop and the lower control arm relocation brackets. That's not too bad either. We got a few more things that we want to address on this car. I don't know if you guys noticed the rear end was leaking. I really want to put gears in this car, so the plan is to do something there. I'm going to actually hire out the gears being done with some trade-off on parts in the Trans Am, so you're not going to be seeing that, but you will see me swap the rear end if we get around to that, hopefully sometime soon. But guys, if you are not subscribed, go down there, hit that subscribe button so you're notified every time we drop a new video. Of course, ring the bell notification. That will be what actually notifies you. And then stay tuned to see what we work on next.